Hi, welcome to Risoyo. My name is Paul Byrne, and I'm the founder and president of Risoyo. We make scalable applications. Usually, we're starting with some sort of prototype or maybe a messy legacy system, and we turn these into performant, affordable, efficient, scalable applications. So, if that's what you're interested in doing in your business, whether it's an internal tool or it's a web application or a SaaS, let us know. Let's get in touch and let's talk about it. We're going to talk about the steps that are required to make scalable applications happen. We're going to talk about some of the gotchas, but we're only going to briefly brush on things. If you're interested in taking more of a deep dive, then I'd ask you to sign up for one of our webinars where we can not only go into more depth, but we can answer any questions you might have and kind of help you figure out what it is that you want to do. There are 5 critical steps to success in building an application and making it scalable. And the first one is pre-planning. And this is the one that is often either abbreviated or gone over far too quickly. And sometimes it's skipped altogether. But if you don't do this part properly, then nothing else that follows is going to work. The second thing that a lot of companies fail to document properly is their value delivery mechanism. So what value are you providing to users? And I don't mean like individual interactions or user stories. I'm talking about why people sign up for your service or your application in the first place. The third is user stories, but we have a little bit different take on it than most companies do. So we'll talk a little bit about how the user stories work and how to write good user stories for developers. Anytime you make a developer guess, you're making a mistake and you're going to add cost and time to the project. Then we're going to talk about turning those user stories into requirements and finally a project plan. So the first thing that we want to do in our pre-planning is define the objectives, personas, and success criteria. And this is for both you as a company. What do you want to get out of this application? What does it provide for you? Generally, it's some sort of business value. And then your users, why are they using this? What do they get out of it? What are their objectives and problems? And once you catalog these well, then your developers can better understand what you're working on. If they don't understand what you're trying to achieve from a business perspective, you're asking them to guess. This will also keep you focused, and it will keep you from reworking down the road when you've already potentially made a decision. Of course, your objectives, personas, success criteria can evolve and will evolve over the course of the project, but they shouldn't evolve drastically, or you may be looking at a rewrite. And this will become the filter for everything else that follows. Next, you want to define your value delivery mechanism. The value delivery mechanism is really just a written expression of your strategy to deliver the results you and your users require, and map your inputs to your outputs. And there are a lot of different kinds of inputs and outputs, and we can talk about those. But essentially, the inputs are your data sources that we mentioned before, and your outputs are either going to be views or they're going to be things that the application does that the user doesn't see, but which are important to delivering the value. When we write user stories at Risoyo, we do it a little bit differently. And again, the purpose of this is so that the developer does not have to guess on what they're doing. You want to remove any sort of guesswork from the developer. Now, they're going to be creative anyway, and there's always going to be some way for them to improve on perhaps what the expectation was, but you still don't want them to guess, and this is the best way to do it. Then you're going to prioritize your user stories in the next step. And you're going to do these as, are these user stories critical, important, are they polished, or do they fall into the what was I thinking category? And the whole purpose of this is to go through all your user stories and only work on the critical ones. And we're going to talk more in the webinar about how these should be prioritized and how they should be perceived as part of the plan. Everything that we've done so far is going to come down into the requirements documentation. And this is a very, very important step. You need to produce business requirements in a way that is possibly different than what you're used to, and maybe different than what you've been reading about, in order to create a successful and scalable application. And what we want to do is we want to create groups of user stories or requirements rather than necessarily going from the top down and creating our groups before we start writing our user stories. We're going to write all the things. We're going to create this catalog of things that the application needs to do or do differently than your current application. And we're going to put this into groupings of items that share both views and data and ones that are accessed by the same personas. And when you group them this way, you're going to find that they don't necessarily fall into, say, account management or product management or something like that. These are going to be items that are more grouped together into sort of how they fit into the flow of the application. We're going to catalog the data structures that are required after we name these user story groupings, just to give everything a handle that people can work on. And then we need to architect the solution. So this is the definition of the technical components. What are the pieces that we're going to use? What kind of materials are we going to use to put together your application? And then finally, once we understand what components we're going to use, what the data structures that are required, and how the stories are grouped together, we'll be able to create a level of effort for each of those requirements. And so as you can see, this is going to flow into our project plan. I would say that if I've done everything right up to this point, my project plan is going to make perfect sense. It's going to be easy to write. In fact, it's almost going to write itself. And I've seen so many businesses essentially start with the plan and then start filling in the details, or they start with the user stories and then try to push those into a plan without either customizing the stories, the way that I've shown, or they've done it without really providing a priority to those user stories. But as you can imagine, the prioritization of those user stories is critical for creating the project plan. And the project plan is not only your collection of user stories and what you're going to put into your issue management system like Jira or Asana or whatever you're working with, which I recommend you do have one. But you're going to find the team. So who's working on this? And not only who, but how much of their time do we get and when do we get them? Some people may start earlier, some may start later. You're going to create that backlog of user stories and turn them into issues in an issue management system. You're going to create a calendar, and this is really a start date and looking forward to the first few milestones. You're going to also create a schedule, and the schedule is going to define how the team works together. Do everyday stand-ups? When do we do our reviews? How long are our sprints? What are the ceremonies, to use a Scrum term, that we are going to use in this particular project? Then you're going to create the milestones, and we'll talk about the milestones in a minute, but this is a critical piece. This is how, by having good milestones, you can keep not only your stakeholders happy, the people that provide the budget for the product, but also you're going to have your own sanity check, and you can see how well are we doing, how well is this project team performing, and how realistic are my expectations. And the milestones are going to help you to judge that. And then finally, we're going to see what reporting do I need. I spoke about the milestones, and the milestones are these groups of user stories. Now, they may or may not be grouped by the name. In other words, you've named these user stories and you've grouped them together as requirements, but you may be taking a requirement from this, a requirement from that, a requirement from this, and putting them into a milestone so that you can execute in a way that shows notable improvement. If everything that I'm doing is underground and not viewable by anybody until everything's done, and then I start to have milestones where I'm actually visualizing something, I'm going to get behind. And I guarantee you, I'm going to frustrate my sponsors. This means that you're going to deliver in a milestone what can be tested, and it needs to be inexpensive to rework. Meaning that if I have a feature that is important for my MVP, I'm going to do the bare minimum. I'm not going to do all the cases. I'm just going to do one case or maybe a couple cases of my feature. And I'm going to be able to just enough so it can be tested. That way, after we do our demo and we present our milestone, we can do all the rework necessary after that. But if I have rework, it's going to be less expensive. I'm going to be wasting less time. So this is why the MVP-based system is critical. And MVP just stands for minimum viable product. But if you want to make something sustainable and you want to get from A to B in the least amount of time, you need to put them in the order that the developers are going to want to work them in, not in the order that you want to work them in. Now, this can, of course, be changed, and we want to be flexible during the process because business requirements change, etc. So finally, we're going to schedule out these milestones, add them to sprints, and I'm going to go into much more detail on this in the webinar. So if you'd like to join us and talk about this methodology of how you can get from prototype to production as quickly as possible, and for the least amount of money and provide a scalable performant application, then let's talk. Come to one of our webinars. They're currently free, and we would love to talk to you about your project and answer questions you might have.